There are some stories so dark that even time refuses to heal their echoes. This is one of them. A young student, full of dreams, leaves his country to chase a brighter future. But what he didn't know was that the light he followed would lead him straight into the shadows of hell. In Cambodia, a place now whispered as the new hub of human cyberslavery, his innocent hope became the bait for a nightmare. This isn't fiction. This is real. A student tortured to death by scammers. A tragedy that unfolded behind the closed walls of digital crime camps. Tonight, we uncover the story they tried to bury under silence. The story of trust, betrayal, and screams that were never heard. Stay till the end, because once you know what really happened, you'll never look at an online job the same way again. It began like any other dream of a student desperate to change his life. 19-year-old Aaron, a bright, hopeful boy from a middle-class family, spent endless nights scrolling through online job portals. He wasn't lazy or reckless, just tired of seeing his parents struggle. The world promised opportunities, and one message changed everything. Work in Cambodia, high salary, free visa, no experience needed. His heart raced as he stared at the glowing screen. It sounded perfect. Too perfect. But when you've seen hunger and hardship, perfection feels like a blessing, not a trap. His friends warned him. His mother begged him not to go. But dreams are louder than fear, and Arun couldn't hear anything except the promise of a better life. Within weeks, a small group of agents arranged his travel papers. They smiled, spoke softly, and told him he'd work in a technology company. There was no reason to doubt them. He packed his small bag, a few clothes, a photo of his parents, and a notebook filled with plans for the future. When he boarded the flight, his heart was heavy, but his eyes sparkled. He didn't know he had already stepped into the jaws of death. The moment he landed in Cambodia, the air felt strange. The man who picked him up wasn't the same recruiter who had talked to him online. The car windows were tinted black, and they drove through endless roads surrounded by forests and silence. "Don't worry," the driver said coldly. "You'll see your company soon." Hours later, they stopped in front of a tall building surrounded by guards. Razor wires topped the walls, and the gates closed behind him with a loud, metallic thud. That sound was the first sign he had entered a prison disguised as a workplace. Inside, the building smelled of sweat and fear. Dozens of young men and women sat before computer screens, typing endlessly. Some had bruises. Some had empty eyes. A tall man in a black uniform walked around with a stick in his hand. "This is your new home," he said. "You'll work here, and you'll work well, or you'll regret being born." Aaron's hands trembled. He wanted to scream, but his voice froze. The dream he had chased had turned into a nightmare in a foreign land where no one could hear his cries. At first, Aaron tried to believe it was temporary. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe he'd be transferred to a real office soon. But the truth unfolded when he was given his training. They taught him how to scam people online, create fake investment links, send fraudulent messages, trick innocent victims. When he refused, the beatings began. They starved him for days, forcing him to work under surveillance. The pain was physical, but what broke him most was the silence, the realization that his life no longer belonged to him. Nights were worse. The screams from other rooms echoed through the corridors. Some begged for mercy, others were beaten unconscious. Phones were taken away, passports burned. Aaron wrote one last note in his small notebook. "If I don't return, tell Mom I tried." That note was found later. Drenched in blood, days turned into weeks, and the nightmare deepened. Aaron's hands bled from typing fake profiles, fake investments, fake promises, scams that destroyed other people's lives while his own was being stolen piece by piece. Every time he hesitated or failed to meet the daily target, the guards punished him brutally. They called it training, but it was torture. Electric shocks, cold water thrown on his face at midnight, food withheld for days. They laughed while he cried. The same boy who once dreamed of sending money home now counted the number of days he could survive. There was no way out. The building was surrounded by high walls, armed guards, and watchtowers. One of the boys who tried to escape was caught the same night. Aaron watched as they dragged him back, broken, beaten, and silent. After that, no one dared to run. The scammers were not just criminals. They were a network of human traffickers disguised behind glowing computer screens. They called the captives workers, but in truth, they were digital slaves. forced to scam people for the profit of those who owned the camp. Every message they sent online carried a drop of their blood. Aaron's hope began to fade, but one day he met Rafi, another captive from Bangladesh. Rafi whispered, "They'll kill you if you stop working. But maybe we can get a message out." That tiny whisper became a flame in Aaron's dying soul. At night, they hid behind a broken terminal and scribbled numbers and names, trying to create a code that could reach someone outside, someone who might care. Every keystroke was a risk, every whisper a crime, punishable by death. But for the first time, Arun had a reason to stay alive, not to escape, but to expose what was happening inside those walls. One evening, the guards found Rafi's phone hidden under a mattress. They dragged him into the corridor. The beating that followed was worse than anything Aaron had ever seen. The walls trembled with Rafi's screams. They made the others watch to remind them what happens to traitors. Aaron's body shook uncontrollably, his lips trembling as tears rolled down his face. When they left Rafi's lifeless body on the floor, the silence that followed was heavier than death itself. The flame of hope inside him flickered, but it didn't die. He knew then, no one was coming. No embassy, no police, no savior. The outside world didn't even know he existed. But he decided to keep fighting, even if it meant dying for the truth. He hid Rafi's coded notes under a loose floorboard, promising himself that if he ever got a chance, he'd send them to someone. Anyone. That night, when everyone else slept, Arun looked at the ceiling and whispered, "Mom, I'm still here." And somewhere, thousands of miles away, his mother woke up crying without knowing why. The morning after Rafi's death, the entire camp was silent. Fear had swallowed every sound, every movement. Even the air felt heavy, thick with grief and the stench of blood. But beneath that silence, something began to stir inside Aaron. He realized that fear was exactly what they wanted. If everyone stayed quiet, they could keep killing one by one. He couldn't let that happen, not after Rafi died trying to fight back. Aaron decided that if death was inevitable, he'd make sure it meant something. He would make the world see what was happening behind those locked walls. He found an old, discarded phone motherboard while cleaning one of the broken computer stations. The SIM slot was cracked, but still usable. With trembling hands, he began to work. Every night, when the guards got drunk and the lights dimmed, he tinkered with the circuits, connecting loose wires, praying that the phone might power on just once. He wasn't an engineer, just a desperate boy with courage left as his only weapon. Finally, after 3 nights, the dim screen flickered to life. The signal was weak, but it was enough to send one text. "Help, Cambodia scam camp. People dying." He sent it to his friend back home, the only number he remembered. For a brief moment, his heart pounded with hope. Maybe someone would see it. Maybe someone would alert the embassy. But that hope lasted only hours. By morning, the guards had discovered his small secret. They stormed the dormitory, shouting, searching, dragging people out by their collars. "Who did it?" they screamed. No one spoke. Aaron kept his head low, praying they wouldn't notice the trembling in his hands. But then one of them found the motherboard under his blanket. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the screams. They took him to the basement, a dark, windowless room that smelled of blood and burned flesh. He was tied to a metal chair, his arms bound so tightly that his skin tore. The boss walked in, slow and calm, holding a cigarette between his fingers. "You think the world cares about you?" he whispered. "You're a nobody. If you die, no one will even ask why." Then he pressed the lit cigarette against Arun's arm. The pain was unbearable, but Arun didn't scream. He had already decided. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. His silence became his last act of defiance. Hours turned into an eternity. When they were done, they threw him back into the dormitory, barely breathing. His friends wept silently, afraid to move him, afraid to speak. Every inch of his body was bruised, his lips swollen, his eyes half open. But when one boy asked, "Why did you do it?" Aaron whispered, "Because the world must know." Even in that broken state, his spirit burned brighter than ever. That night, The sound of rain mixed with distant thunder outside the camp. Lightning flashed across the iron bars, a cruel reminder that freedom was so close, yet impossible to touch. And somewhere, miles away, his friend back home stared at the strange message on his phone, wondering if it was a prank, not realizing it was the last cry for help from a boy trapped in hell. The message reached home like a whisper carried by the wind, faint, uncertain, but enough to shake one heart. Arun's friend Rohit read the words again and again, disbelief turning into dread. Help, Cambodia scam camp, people dying. It didn't sound like a prank. It sounded like a cry from the grave. He tried calling back, but the number was unreachable. He sent messages, dozens of them, but none were delivered. Panic took over. He rushed to Arun's parents' house, his voice trembling as he showed them the message. His mother dropped to the floor, clutching her chest, screaming his name. His father stood frozen, unable to breathe. The boy they had sent abroad with hope was begging for help. Within hours, the family contacted authorities, embassies, and news channels. But bureaucracy moved slower than tragedy. Papers needed to be filled, official requests needed to be sent. And while they waited, somewhere in Cambodia, Aaron's life was being drained minute by minute. The scammers had tightened their control after discovering the leak. Guards doubled, punishments tripled. No one was allowed to speak, not even whisper. Cameras were installed in every corner. Every eye in the camp held the same silent question: who will be next? Meanwhile, the syndicate leaders were furious. They had spent years building a network across borders, a human trafficking empire disguised as a tech business. They bought and sold people like data, using fake job offers to lure desperate souls from India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Those who refused to scam were beaten, tortured, or killed. Those who survived became numb, living ghosts clicking on screens that stole from strangers. The message Arun sent was a crack in their wall of secrecy, one that could expose everything. And they were determined to seal it with blood. Inside the camp, Arun's condition worsened. His body was weak, but his mind refused to surrender. The thought that his family might now know, that maybe, just maybe, help was coming, kept him breathing. Each breath was a rebellion. His cellmates tried to tend to his wounds with torn cloth and dirty water. One of them, a Chinese boy named Wei, whispered, "You gave the world a voice." "Don't die yet." Aaron smiled faintly, his lips split and dry. "If I die," he murmured, "make sure they know it wasn't an accident." Outside the camp, a small online article surfaced in a local newspaper. Family claims student trapped in Cambodia job scam. It didn't make headlines, but it was enough. A few activists and journalists began digging. They found similar stories: missing youths, fake job offers, unreturned passports. The puzzle pieces started to connect. But inside that dark building, Arun didn't know any of it. He only knew pain, hunger, and fading light. He whispered one last prayer before closing his swollen eyes. Let the truth find a way out. Even if I don't. That night, thunder rolled again, shaking the metal roof. For a second, the power flickered, plunging the entire camp into darkness. In that brief silence, someone, maybe fate itself, seemed to listen. As the article began circulating online, a quiet storm started brewing thousands of miles away. Activists who had been tracking human trafficking cases in Southeast Asia saw the story and immediately recognized the pattern. The words Cambodia scam camp sent chills down their spines. It was a phrase whispered by survivors, a phrase often censored or erased before reaching the public. One activist named Farah from an anti-slavery organization reached out to Rohit and Arun's parents. Within hours, screenshots, travel records, and chat logs were compiled into a detailed report. For the first time, the world had a name, a face, and a message that linked to the mysterious cyber-slavery syndicates of Cambodia. Meanwhile, inside the walls of the camp, the atmosphere grew more dangerous than ever. The bosses had learned that foreign journalists were asking questions. Their anger was like fire, unpredictable and merciless. They began transferring captives to new locations, erasing all traces of evidence. The guards whispered that inspection teams might come, and so they had to make examples out of those who caused trouble. Aaron's name was first on the list. He was dragged out of his cell once again, his body barely holding itself upright. The room they took him to this time was not for interrogation. It was for punishment that had only one purpose: silence. They tied him to a chair, poured cold water over him, and began shocking him with electric wires. Each jolt made his body convulse violently, his screams echoing through the metal walls. The guards laughed as if it was entertainment. "So brave now?" One of them sneered. Aaron couldn't speak. His tongue was swollen, his lips split. Yet through the pain, his mind wandered to his mother's face. Her voice echoed in his memory. Never give up, no matter how dark it gets. That single memory became his anchor, his shield against madness. He didn't cry out anymore. His silence began to unnerve even the torturers. Days passed. He was thrown back into the dormitory, half-conscious, his skin burned and bruised. The other captives watched him with tears in their eyes. They couldn't believe he was still breathing. But his spirit had become something they hadn't seen before, unbreakable. Every time he opened his eyes, he whispered the same thing. "They'll know. They'll come." His faith became contagious. The others began writing names, numbers, and hidden messages in the lining of old cardboard boxes, fragments of truth that might one day escape, even if they didn't. Outside, Farah's report began gaining attention. News outlets started picking it up, calling it the digital slave trade of Cambodia. Embassies received inquiries, politicians faced questions. For the first time, those who hid behind corporate masks and false ads felt the pressure of exposure. The syndicate was now desperate. They ordered all communication devices destroyed and all troublesome workers relocated or disposed of. The meaning of that word was clear. Inside the camp, whispers spread that trucks would come that night to take some of them away, and no one ever came back from those trips. Aaron knew his time was running out. He had no strength left to fight physically. But there was one thing still burning inside him, his will to make sure his death meant something. That night, when the guards fell asleep drunk, he whispered to Wei, "If they take me, don't let them hide me." Wei nodded, tears filling his eyes. "I promise, brother," Aaron smiled faintly. "Then my story won't die with me." The night came drenched in rain, the sky growling with thunder, like it knew what was about to happen. The guards moved through the corridors with flashlights, their boots splashing through puddles of water that seeped into the building. "Line up!" one of them shouted. The captives gathered in silence, pale faces, trembling bodies, and eyes full of dread. They already knew what this meant. The trucks had arrived, and the ones taken tonight would never return. Aaron stood near the end of the line, barely able to keep his balance. His wounds had reopened, blood soaking through his torn shirt, yet he stayed silent, clutching the small piece of paper hidden in his fist, Rafi's code. The last proof of their truth. The guards read out names. One by one, those called were dragged forward, their cries swallowed by the sound of rain. When they shouted Aaron's name, Wei grabbed his arm. "No, please, he's dying already." The guard struck Wei across the face with a metal rod. Aaron turned slowly, his eyes meeting Wei's. In that moment, they both understood. This was the end. Aaron whispered, "Don't forget." The guards yanked him forward, chaining his wrists. His body was weak, but his gaze was steady. The others watched in helpless silence as he was led toward the trucks parked outside, dark metal beasts waiting to swallow lives. The truck's interior was cold and smelled of rust and fear. Dozens of captives sat in silence, chained together. Some prayed, some wept, some simply stared into nothingness. Arun looked out through a small crack in the metal wall and saw lightning flash across the distant fields. For a brief second, it illuminated the world outside. A world still moving, living, unaware of the horrors being buried under its rain. He thought of his mother again, her hands waving at the airport, her smile hiding her tears. "I'll make you proud, Mom," he had said that day. The irony tore through his heart like glass. After hours of driving, the truck stopped. The captives were dragged into an old warehouse near the border. It was quiet, isolated, a place used to erase people. The boss stood waiting, surrounded by men holding weapons. "These are the ones who caused trouble," one of the guards said. The boss nodded slowly, lighting a cigarette. "Then let's make sure no one else gets brave ideas." His voice was calm, emotionless. One by one, they began beating the captives again, forcing them to confess who had sent the message. Aaron didn't speak. Every blow that landed on him echoed like thunder, but he stayed silent. His defiance became unbearable for them. Finally, the boss crouched beside him and said softly, "You could have lived, boy. You could have made money, played along, but you wanted to be a hero. Arun lifted his head weakly, blood dripping from his lip. "Heroes don't die for money," he whispered. "They die for truth." For a moment, even the boss paused. Then his face hardened and he signaled the guards. The blows continued until Arun stopped moving. His body fell limp, but his hand still clenched the small blood-soaked paper that carried the coded message. By morning, the warehouse was silent. The trucks left, leaving behind nothing but a few stains on the ground, and a ghost whose story was about to travel further than any of them ever imagined. The next morning, gray light filtered weakly through the broken windows of the camp. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy with fear. Wei sat silently in the corner of the dormitory, his eyes swollen, his heart pounding with rage and grief. He had seen Arun dragged away the night before, and deep inside he knew he wouldn't return. Every sound now felt distant, muffled by the horror replaying in his mind. But then, as one of the guards walked past with a blood-stained rag, something slipped from his pocket. A small, crumpled paper, smeared red. We recognized it instantly. Rafi's code. Arun had held it till his last breath, and somehow it had found its way back. Fate wasn't finished yet. We waited until nightfall. The guards had grown careless after the killings, drunk on their own brutality. He hid the paper under his tongue, knowing if they found it, he'd be killed instantly. His hands shook as he prepared his plan, the same plan he and Arun had once whispered about: escape. He studied the guards' shifts, the weak spots in the fence, the timing of the patrol truck. Every second counted. Around midnight, when the generator shut down for maintenance, the lights went out completely. Darkness became his ally. He slipped through the dormitory window, landing hard on the wet mud below, pain shooting up his legs. But he didn't stop. Rain began again, masking his footsteps. He crawled through the grass, keeping low, avoiding the beams of flashlights sweeping across the compound. A guard's dog barked in the distance. His heart stopped. He pressed himself into the mud, praying the sound of thunder would drown his breath. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, he reached the outer wall, the same wall that had haunted every prisoner's dream. Razor wire glistened under the rain, waiting to slice through flesh. Wei pulled out a rusted metal bar he had hidden earlier and began digging near the drainage pipe. It was small, tight, almost impossible, but he didn't care. Blood mixed with mud as he crawled through it, the wire tearing his skin. When he finally emerged on the other side, the cold air hit him like freedom. He didn't stop running, through the trees, through the mud, through pain and fear. He ran until dawn. When he reached a small roadside market miles away, he collapsed near an old truck driver. The man, startled by his condition, rushed to help. Wei could barely speak. He pulled out the paper from his pocket, handing it over with trembling hands. "Take this to embassy," he whispered before fainting. The driver, realizing the seriousness of the situation, hid Wei under a blanket and drove toward Phnom Penh. Days later, Wei woke up in a hospital, surrounded by officials. The coded paper had reached the Indian and Bangladeshi embassies. The message was decoded. It contained names, coordinates, and proof of hundreds of captives trapped in scam compounds across Cambodia. The photographs and details matched ongoing disappearances from multiple countries. The truth Arun had died protecting was finally in the hands of the world. Journalists began reporting it under a new headline: "Student's Death Exposes Global Cyber Slavery Network." As Wei lay in the hospital bed, tears streamed down his face. He whispered, "You did it, Arun. They'll know now." Outside the window, the city buzzed with reporters, cameras, and officials storming the scam compounds. Dozens of victims were rescued. The nightmare was breaking apart piece by piece. And somewhere, far away in India, Arun's parents received a call from the embassy. The call that confirmed their worst fear but also gave them something precious. Their son's truth had changed the world. That night, Wei lit a candle near his hospital bed and placed the small, blood-stained paper beside it. The flame flickered softly, as if bowing to the courage of the boy who refused to stay silent. The boy who turned his death into a voice for thousands. The world finally woke up. Within days, international headlines screamed of cyber slavery camps in Cambodia. Videos leaked from rescue missions showed trembling survivors, bruised and weak, being pulled from guarded compounds surrounded by razor wire and armed men. The truth that Arun died for had detonated across the world like a bomb. Nations that had ignored the whispers were now forced to face the screams. Police raids swept across cities like Phnom Penh, Sihanoukville, and Poipe, places once called the digital frontier, now exposed as modern-day slave markets. In one such raid, officers found computer rooms filled with hundreds of fake profiles, servers storing billions of stolen dollars, and dormitories where human beings had been treated worse than machines. On the walls, written in chalk, they found a phrase that froze everyone in silence. "They can kill us, but not our truth." The investigator who saw it said later, "It was like a message from the dead." No one knew it then. But those words were Aaron's, words he had scribbled during one of his final nights. News networks aired documentaries. Governments promised action, and the public finally saw the faces behind the scams they had once ignored. Boys and girls, barely in their 20s, who had gone chasing online dreams and ended up in cages. Among the rescued captives, Wei became their voice. From his hospital bed, his trembling voice was broadcast across multiple channels. He was just a student, Wei said. He didn't want revenge. He only wanted to be heard. His name was Aaron. The entire world heard that name, and for the first time, silence turned into outrage. Across social media, campaigns began. Justice for Aaron trended for weeks. Donations poured in to rescue remaining captives and support their families. Activists demanded stricter international laws against cyber trafficking. The Cambodian government, under immense global pressure, promised to dismantle every scam syndicate operating in their territory. But beneath every announcement, every headline, one truth lingered painfully. Justice could never bring back the ones who had already been buried in secret graves. Among them, Arun, whose body was never found. Back home, Arun's mother sat beside his empty bed, clutching his old notebook, the same one he carried when he left for Cambodia. Its pages were filled with dreams. Buy Mama a house. Start a tech company. Make Dad proud. She ran her fingers over the ink, tears falling onto the words. On the last page, written faintly in his handwriting, she saw something new. Perhaps he had written it before leaving, or maybe someone had added it later. No one knew. It said, "If I ever disappear, don't cry. Just tell them I tried." In that moment, her cries turned into prayers. Her son hadn't just tried. He had succeeded in something far greater than he ever imagined. The manhunt began. Governments that once turned a blind eye now had no choice but to act. Interpol, ASEAN task forces, and cybercrime units from multiple countries launched coordinated raids across Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. The syndicate's leaders, men who had hidden behind luxury offices and fake business names, started to vanish one by one, fleeing across borders. But this time there was nowhere left to hide. The trail of data, accounts, and witnesses led straight to them. Their mansions were stormed, their offshore bank accounts frozen, their fake job websites shut down. The empire of greed they had built on human suffering began to crumble. Meanwhile, Wei became the face of survival. News channels followed his journey as he helped investigators trace the network. He showed them the underground rooms, the computers still logged into scam dashboards, the handwritten lists of new recruits. His testimony became evidence in international court. But every time he spoke, he mentioned Aaron's name. "He's the reason we're all here," he said to the cameras. "He gave us the courage to fight back." His voice trembled, not from fear, but from grief that refused to fade. The world finally saw what had been hidden behind glowing screens, a graveyard disguised as a workplace. As months passed, justice began to take form. Dozens of traffickers were arrested. Victims were reunited with families they thought they'd never see again. Human rights organizations began programs to help them recover, offering therapy, shelter, and hope. But for many, healing was slow. Nightmares didn't end just because the doors were open. Survivors spoke of screams that still echoed in their dreams, of faces they'd never forget, especially the boy who refused to break. Arun had become a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of resistance. In India, a memorial was built in his name at his old college. The students lit candles and placed flowers under his framed photograph. Below it, a plaque read, "He gave his life for the truth. May no dreamer ever fall into darkness again." His parents attended the ceremony, holding hands tightly, their faces marked with both pride and pain. His mother whispered softly to the picture, "You're home now, my son." The wind that passed through the courtyard that evening felt almost alive, carrying a whisper. as if his soul had finally found peace. But not everyone was ready to let the fire die. The journalists who had broken the story continued their investigation. They discovered that the Cambodian scam syndicates were just one part of a larger global network, spreading into other countries. The horror wasn't over. It had only been exposed. And somewhere, deep in the internet's underbelly, new recruiters were still sending messages that looked exactly like the one that lured Aaron months ago. The war against digital slavery had begun. But this time, the world was watching. Months turned into a year, but Arun's story refused to fade. Across social media, people shared his photo, not as a victim, but as a warning. His name became a symbol for every young dreamer tempted by the promise of easy jobs abroad. Documentaries were made, laws were reformed, and digital safety campaigns began in schools and universities. Governments set up helplines for victims of human trafficking, and embassies increased vigilance. Aaron's sacrifice had shaken the system from within. The boy who had once dreamed of a better life had unknowingly saved thousands of others from walking into the same trap. Wei, now free and rebuilding his life, started a non-profit organization called Project Aaron. Its mission was to track, rescue, and rehabilitate victims of cyberslavery across Southeast Asia. Survivors joined hands with journalists and cybersecurity experts, tracing dark web trails and exposing hidden compounds. Every success story began the same way, a message of hope sent in Arun's name. And every time a victim returned home, Wei felt as if Aaron was still guiding him. "He's not gone," he would whisper. "He's everywhere light touches, but the darkness never vanished completely." Deep in the ruins of one of the abandoned scam centers in Cambodia, police found something strange, a scratched wall with a message written in English. "If anyone reads this, tell my mother I didn't give up." It was signed, Aaron. That single sentence, etched in desperation, traveled the world. It appeared in newspapers, documentaries, and awareness posters. It reminded humanity of the silent cries of those trapped behind the facade of technology. It was a wound and a warning, written in blood and courage. His mother kept that message framed in her living room. Every morning she placed a marigold flower beside it and prayed for the souls still trapped out there. "You're saving them even now," she would say softly. His father, though broken, began volunteering with organizations to spread awareness about job scams. Together they turned their pain into purpose. Aaron's room remained untouched, his books still on the shelf, his favorite mug still on the table, as if he had just stepped out and might return at any moment. And maybe, in some way, he already had. One evening, Wei stood at a press conference in Phnom Penh. Behind him were rescued workers, faces once pale with fear, now glowing with hope. Cameras flashed, and Wei took a deep breath before speaking. "Aaron's story began with a dream," he said, "but it doesn't have to end in tragedy for others. If you ever get a message promising easy money abroad, remember his name, remember his courage, and remember, freedom always has a price, but slavery starts with silence." The hall erupted in applause, but Wei's eyes were moist. He looked up at the ceiling, as if thanking a spirit watching over them all. As the lights dimmed and the press event ended, the camera zoomed out over Cambodia's skyline, thousands of city lights glowing against the dark horizon. Somewhere in those lights, you could almost see the reflection of Aaron's smile, peaceful, eternal, unbroken. And that was the heartbreaking story of Arun, the boy whose dream became a revolution, a victim who became a voice for millions trapped behind screens, in silent prisons built by greed. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share it. Speak about it, because awareness saves lives. Would you recognize a scam if it came for you, or someone you love? Think before you click. Subscribe to Unseen Mystery, because next time, we're uncovering another real story the world tried to hide. Until then, stay aware, stay safe,